Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm just swirling in the news and information that's kind of pouring over the internet. And just watched Democracy Now! Program last night with Amy Goodman and interviewing Michael Moore. And last night was the opening of Michael Moore's film, Fahrenheit 11/9, his takeoff on why the 2016 election was in America was so corrupt and why he predicted near some 1 or 2 years earlier that Donald Trump would win the election and that we need to pay serious attention to Donald Trump and his people. And I was just reading on the internet a couple of headlines already early coming out. Michael Moore's film Fahrenheit 11/9 is bombing. This comes from Vulture on the internet, basically saying his film was not near as popular as his earlier ones, Fahrenheit 9/11, and certainly not films like Bowling for Columbine, which won him an Academy Award in 2003 or 4, somewhere down there. And I'm a fan of Michael Moore's in a certain way, and that's part of my presentation this morning, part of my response to Michael Moore from the point of view of a fearologist, from the point of view of someone who's studied fear for a long time. So I'm going to get to Michael Moore's film. I just want to give you the other headline I just saw from Al Jazeera. Their headline this morning, everybody's trying to grab the greatest, newest headline to get some press. And of course, Michael Moore probably loves it just as much as Donald Trump loves press and headlines. Michael Moore compares Donald Trump to Hitler in his new film. The new film is Fahrenheit 11/9. And that's really about a pretty good example, as good as I can think of in the last long time, since Bowling for Columbine and the culture of fear that was a main topic of that film. Right after the high school mass shooting, 1999, and then Moore did this film in 2002. However, so he's always been interested in fear and how it affects social movements, activism, American politics, and the very structure and functioning operation of a democracy. That's why I want to speak to this, because I was doing my dissertation at the time when Michael Moore's film came out. I was very aware of the news on Columbine High School and that mass shooting, and the post-traumatic effects that that's having on the entire nation and a lot of the world. So I like Michael Moore, and he's a great activist for our times. He's an artist in his own way as a filmmaker. He writes his own narratives. He's obviously got a very powerful research crew, and I care about what he does as terms of public or populist education. And that's a field of my own, is attempting to understand how populist education movements through history have changed and brought about revolutions, and sometimes not brought about revolutions. And that's really an important part of the Fearology Institute, which I am founder and director of since July 2018, this year. So I take this guy seriously. I take, of course, anybody seriously, whether it's an American leader, president right now, or in any other country or the world, and leaders of social movements who are not recognized necessarily by mainstream institutions. They may be marginal leaders and so on. Well, my agenda is fearologist, is how to bring a fearological perspective to these social movements and their effectiveness, and ultimately to deal with the fear problem. And I think the fear problem, that's just one of my theses that you'll see in any of my writing or videos for the last 3 decades. Not videos for the last 3 decades, I'm making those in the last 4 weeks, to understand how fear plays a part in all of those movements, and both on the good side and on the not so good side. So Michael Moore is being interviewed last night, and I'm sitting there watching. I haven't seen the film yet. I'm going to. So watching the film, And there's a place in the interview after he describes this of the film. Of course, Amy Goodman, the host of Democracy Now!, very famous. These people, they have hundreds of thousands of viewers, if not more, and even in their small millions that watch that program is mostly left progressive type people. And it's great that that news is operating and free from corporate interests. Michael Moore says at one point, after he says, I predicted that election that Donald Trump would win, nobody was listening to me. And he was trying to figure out why nobody was listening to him. And he has a few different reasons for that. I'm not going to go into all those fine details. But here's what I pick up on my ear as a fear researcher. He says he's got a lot of critics right now on different interviews that he's done, and they're saying, Michael, why are you scaring us so much? Is this going to really do any good? Why? Well, he's comparing Donald Trump to Hitler and the takeover of the Nazis in Germany, and making that analogy with America right now. There's a lot of other critics, and I can see why they are critical of the kind of rise of fascism in various forms and new forms. And Michael Moore makes that case. This is quite a new form that the corporate elite, billionaires, are taking as a type of fascism in America. It's not the simple, old, predictable one that we're used to politically. Michael Moore says at one point, and Amy, of course, is listening carefully, so is the audience. How's Michael Moore going to respond to this criticism he's got from various interviews that he's had, that he's kind of fear-mongering? He's kind of scaring the people, perhaps unnecessarily. Michael Moore would not think it's unnecessary, and that really comes across in his interview on Democracy Now! And he says more or less, I'm not scaring the people. I'm not causing more fear. All right, I'm listening. I'm listening, Michael. Okay, how are you going to wind that argument? Then he says, because they're already terrified. The people are already terrified. It's a great point in the interview, because right about there, he says, and if people aren't terrified, well then, and he literally goes through these gestures, 10 seconds, nothing said. Amy says nothing. He says no words logically, connected to his argument. And you realize it's actually not an argument. He actually has nothing to say about it. Or, I'll give him credit. Maybe he's just tongue-tied. The people are already terrified. And if we're not terrified, then... So it was a criticism of, I guess, that we're not... I'm going to speak I'm saying North Americans, but you could extend that as big as you want. The American empire regime, colonialist regime, has a huge impact on a whole lot of the world, and is doing a lot of fear mongering through wars and a whole lot of other things. Domination. Michael Moore really didn't have anything concrete to say about why people should be terrified, other than this is a fascist regime and this guy is like Trump and he's very smart and he's not getting out. And then I started thinking about the connection to fear, as though Michael's basically saying, I'm not causing more fear. People are already terrified. Interesting point. I think there's some truth to that. Where I don't get the truth so much is because I didn't hear anything from Michael Moore about a new way, a creative way, or even that we ought to think of new ways to deal with fear / terror in the extreme. That's perhaps deep inside the American psyche, at least, North American psyche at least. The culture of fear. And I kept waiting. Where's the new knowledge? Where's the new guidance to possibilities? The leadership and the power and the educative smarts and in media that he has, like nearly 4 decades or so. Uh, what a golden opportunity to say, okay, yeah, okay, we've got a lot of fear. I'm probably adding some to it. Come on, Michael, be honest. Of course you are. You're exacerbating, you know. Okay, well, people are already terrorized. Yeah, they probably are. So, if you're adding a little bit of trauma to the trauma they already had, you got to own that. Come on, Michael, you got to own that. That was a big mess and pretty unethical, really, from my point of view. Certainly not gonna do a lot of good, I don't think. We'll see. And that was the missed opportunity, of course. And yeah, okay, I would have liked to be in his shoes with that much media paying attention to me and be able to say some of the things I want to say. But I'm not going to go into the whole sour grapes and wish I was there doing that. That's not going to do anybody any good. I just was really looking forward to, since 1999, of him, interviewing Barry Glasner, the author of The Culture of Fear in America, in 1999, and centralizing him in that film, which was on gun violence and school, mass murders and all the problems in America around violence. He's been on this topic of fear, and even before that, in the power of the elite, that he's very much argues around classism and the takeover of the elites and so on. So I agree with all the classism critique, and I think what we're getting to, and what I saw in that moment of when he just could not answer. And if you're not terrified, then, well, you're, he didn't quite say it that way, but he pretty much said, you're what, an idiot? You're frozen in your own terror. You're ignorant. You're in denial, right? You're dissociated. You're frozen. You remember the fight, flight, freeze I've talked about in other videos. In a way, I think he was saying, then you're all frozen and you're unawake, and you better frickin' wake up to this crazy regime and this crazy person, quote, the president of the United States, and what he's doing. And of course, a lot of people think he's a great president. Not the majority. Enough to win power and keep it. What a moment. Michael Moore criticizing us for being ineffective in rebelling to the regime, and we didn't stop it. Quote, we, the progressive left, are just sane people in the middle, maybe. Well, everybody's afraid, is what I would have said. And we've got to learn some new ways to deal with fear in this country, the world. And that never came across. And then the worst part, Michael Moore should know better. He's actually studied these people. He listened to Barry Glasner's stuff. I've written to him. I've sent to my stuff. He never responds. But, he's a busy guy and is wanting to respond and connect with me, and I could perhaps advise him on some of his work. As I say, he's a very powerful, effective communicator, leader, artist, and not the greatest educator, unfortunately. And certainly not in fear management education. So he's got something to learn, and we all do. So the worst part is he really was saying, and that really is the conclusion, I think, of the whole interview with Amy. Amy just sat quiet, didn't say anything. She was enjoying Michael Moore so much. She's so supportive of his work, which is great to a point. I just wish she was a little more intervening as a critical interviewer journalist at that time. But I watched that sequence, and it's right kind of near the end of the interview. If you go on to Democracy Now! On Friday, this last Friday, and watch it, I guess that's the 21st. Michael Moore was very clearly saying, fear has to motivate us to change, and let's do it. Use your terror, admit it, and then work with it to make, basically he said, put your bodies down on the line on the streets to stop this crazy regime. We wanted that kind of revolution, that kind of stoppage of work, life, fill the streets, lay your bodies on the line, and perhaps be beaten and even killed in that process. And that's the kind of classic, old left response. Not all bad, there's lots of good stuff in that response, but it's kind of the ticket, the habit of thought of how they operate and what you have to do to stop these kind of regimes, which are extremely violent in many ways. He didn't talk about a non-violence revolution. He didn't talk about fearlessness. He didn't talk about other ways, even creative ways. He just said, if you're not terrified and you don't use your terror to get going, you're, again, idiot, frozen, not valuable person. Didn't say that, but is that implied? Because you won't lay your body down on the street, because you're not going to allow yourself to be, in my case, Michael, I don't want to be driven by fear, just like these people are, these leaders and their followers. And if we, so-called on the other side, the enemy, so-called, continue to operate being motivated by fear primarily, which is really what you were saying. Of course, yes, we're motivated by the search for freedom, the desire for freedom. Yes, I know. But underneath that, the meta perspective, the affective end, which is what a fearologist pays attention to. You're asking us to be motivated by fear/terror. So get out there. And that has been disastrous throughout history, as far as I'm concerned. That's an argument, that's a debate, and I'm open to that debate. And the worst part, again, asking us to be motivated by fear when we've seen what the disaster of fear-based motivation does on so many levels. There's so much literature, so much research in the last 40, 50 years on this. That's sort of being ignored, Michael, in your approach, your teaching, your leadership. And, we could have come up with a whole other bunch of schemas like, flight, fight is not the first, freeze is not a great option, but it might be important. And then, as I've talked in one of my other videos, we have tend and befriend, which is the healing process, a more feminist perspective. Then we have fearlessness, and then we have fearless as different strategies. And if you want to put other little sub-strategies in those, I'm fine with that too. I'm sure you would like the strategy of courageousness. And I put that really close or somewhat connected to, but not quite, in my work and writing and theorizing. It's just a little bit not quite to fearlessness yet, which is a big jump. And that's my work, fear and fearlessness, primarily. So that's kind of the opening response number one. I don't know if I'll respond again to Michael Moore on video. A lot of people see him and see this, and perhaps some will just begin to say, Michael, we need to be a little more subtle, a little more nuanced than just getting, those media bites and getting people stirred up because you're so oppositional and you're the big fighter and let's get out and put our bodies on the line. Really, I know you're doing that, and a lot of people are going to do that, and that's going to be a strategy, and that's part of how we are attempting to turn this world around to a nonviolent, much more non-fear-based world. That's my agenda. So if I can help in any way, I'm here to do that. People can get a hold of me easily on the internet and so on. Write me an email. Send me a letter. Send me a psychic vibe. Perhaps we'll connect, and perhaps Michael will connect with that new energy and that new vibe that we can create to be much more creative, much more aware of research, much more application of good fearology, as well as other ways of handling very powerful cultural political changes that are going on right now, where everybody's, quote, fearful in some sense, frightened of the future, the outcomes of some of these very extreme regimes, the seeming dissolving of democracy and social nets, protecting people who are vulnerable. Yeah, that's all really important stuff. And I'm with Michael, and I'm with the activists doing that. I'm not with fear-based motivations to make those changes. It will feed the fear matrix, fear's empire. And that's not an attempt to try and make people afraid of feeding that fear's empire, fear matrix. And you can see it's tricky. It's tricky to not feel like, or even be actually feeding the fear matrix in the very talk, the very discussion about fear. As I said in one of my last videos, we need to do a lot better fear talks to develop our fearuality so much better. And so, Michael Moore, perhaps you want to use a concept like fearuality or fearlessness in your model and suggest, as we have real serious crises to deal with and may have to be out on the streets at times, there's a whole lot of other work in this nuanced field of activism, subtle activism, if you will, but very powerful work in reimagining our relationship to fear and terror, and not seeing fear and terror as the political motivator that it so often is. And Michael Moore on Democracy Now! On September 21st was actually promoting 2 million plus viewers. We've got a long way to go. Thanks, Michael Moore, for your attempts. Thanks for your followers, your supporters. And we've done a lot of good work. You're doing a lot of good work, and we've got to upgrade, download some new approaches, new knowledge, especially on the topic of fear. Okay, thanks very much.